Hi, my name is Julia Gerace, and this is my final project for Christian Spirituality RTS 5020, entitled Christian Themes Through a Secular Lens. The goal of this project is to open up dialogues about Christianity. I plan to do this using pop culture references from movies and TV. The purpose of using pop culture is not to insult theology or religion, it's not to overanalyze the movie content, and it's not to criticize if the movie is scripturally perfect or not. The intention is to produce deeper connections that might have otherwise been ignored. Connections that the average viewer might find intriguing, thoughtful, or spiritual. Movie and television aficionados span all ages, cultures, and faiths. The appeal of this entertainment is not just visual, audible, but it's also emotional. It creates imprints on our psyche because we have allowed ourselves the suspension of disbelief. We empathize with the characters and their situations and allow the story to become ours. I wasn't on the Titanic, but I can imagine how it must have been. I can empathize with the depiction of what the characters experienced, and I can imagine how I would have responded. The medium of film and television allows multiple generations to engage and appreciate the stories. Many people have fond memories of viewing movies with their parents, their children, and their friends. There are basic themes that we will cover: redemption, humanity, resurrection, love, sacrifice, and creation. We will also delve into two movies that are religious, but not about religion. All of these sources are easily researched, and that's the beauty of both pop culture and the internet. There is a plethora of noteworthy articles to cite, as well as many threads on various forums such as Reddit, podcasts, and blog posts. The authors range from pastors and theologians to philosophers to movie critics and to the layperson just voicing their opinions. The writers and actors of these movies have varied religious views as well. Some have a more reverent experience, and some have a more combative relationship with the church. The movies we're going to talk about in this presentation are The Poseidon Adventure, Joe versus the Volcano, Dogma, The Trouble with Angels, and the TV series Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Why pop culture? Well, pop culture in America reflects the values and attitudes of the country, usually, though not always, through the pathway of the younger generation. That being said, the younger generation becomes the older generation, and they all still like to hang on tight to their own pop culture references. These references are not only a time capsule of the society around us, but they also form a foundation through which we view our own milestones. How many of us remember waiting in line for Star Wars? Or marveling at the special effects of Jurassic Park? Or eagerly awaiting the next installment of Lord of the Rings or Harry Potter? Do you remember the first movie that scared you? Or made you cry? Or even whose hand you might have held? I bet you do. TV, for many of us, was also a part of growing up in America. How many theme songs can you still sing? What was the last show you were allowed to watch before bedtime? What character lines do you still quote? Certain generations will recall being home to watch the final episode of MASH, while others can recall the summer that was terrorized by Jaws. According to Pew Research, as recently as the 90s, 90% of America identified as Christian. That number has decreased over the years to 66%, but our subjects today span the latter half of the 20th century, so we will be keeping that 90% figure in mind. Was it easier for films to include Christian themes when so much of the population identified as Christian? Were certain aspects a given that the viewers would understand in the subtext? Christianity and pop culture, again, movies and TV for now, is a tricky line to walk on. How religious is too religious? How many jokes can be made before it becomes blasphemous? What level of spirituality will intrigue the most viewers, and what will they interpret from that? These are some of the questions that I will address. A quick note about horror movies. Horror movies as a genre naturally gravitate towards Christian themes of good versus evil, the devil, strength of faith, and hell. Given the wide range of horror, this subject could be its own presentation. Whether we're looking at The Omen, The Conjuring, or The Exorcist, and all the movies that share those themes, people will say it's religious exploitation, Christian propaganda, or just outright disturbed. The first movie we're going to talk about is The Poseidon Adventure. The Poseidon Adventure is a 70s disaster flick from the master of disaster, Irwin Allen, and based on the book by Paul Gallico. It's known for its stellar cast and its cutting-edge visual effects. The Poseidon Adventure is a fan favorite of the disaster movie genre. The story is simple. A rogue waves turns a cruise ship upside down, and the only way to be saved is to climb to the top. The rest of the movie is about the passengers and the destruction that they face. There is one storyline among the characters that more or less makes it from the book to the movie, and that is the story of the Reverend Scott. He is electrically portrayed by the great Gene Hackman. Having been reassigned by his church for his unorthodox views, given that he's not wearing a collar, we wonder if he has actually been defrocked. Scott is a passenger on his way to another country. The onboard chaplain, an older man named John, asks him to give a morning sermon, and it is wildly aggressive. He says that God loves the people who try, the people who fight, the people who are strong. It's explosive and both shocking and yet inspiring to some of the passengers. That night, it's New Year's Eve, and as the passengers are beginning to celebrate, the ship capsizes. The initial disaster scene takes place in the dining room. After the shock wears off, Scott is trying to assess the situation and find the survivors. And while searching, he comes across John, who is sitting there dazed and looking around at his own group's survivors. Looking for some moment of clarity or perhaps normalcy, Scott randomly asks what he thought of his sermon. And John says that it was a sermon only for the strong, only for people like himself. John says that he will be staying here with the scared, the injured, and the dying. He knows and accepts that this choice will also mean his own death. Scott then goes on to lead a small group up through the inverted ship. There are tragic moments along the way, and when they have finally reached the top, there is one final hurdle. Scott takes it upon himself to take the challenge and sacrifice his life for the other. And in his final plea, he angrily calls on God, asking what more could he possibly want. Scott's death is the last in the movie, and the remaining people are rescued. That is Ernest Borgnine and Jack Albertson. There's Red Buttons, Pamela Sue Martin, Gene Hackman. An excellent scene. In both religious and secular terms, redemption is the salvation of the soul, or how we redeem ourselves for our perceived misdoings. In the movie world, this usually entails sacrificing your life for others. Both Scott and John sacrificed their lives in different ways while trying to save the lives of the others. Would God have a preference? Someone like John who quietly sacrifices for people who are unable to try? Or someone who aggressively pushes and fights for what he feels is right? A meek sacrifice or an angry sacrifice? An interesting thread to pursue would be to ponder on God's take on the Reverend Scott. While learning about the evangelical stream in Foster, I was reminded of this character. His tone is very much that of a revivalist preacher, and the character's energy and passion for God is unmatched. We will discuss later as to whether Scott's fervor was well pitched. Other characters also have spiritual journeys. Mr. Martin, played by Red Buttons, is a quiet and humble man who is a solitary passenger and a lonely businessman. However, he is the one who comforts, who offers to stay with people while they get their wits about them. He is the one who covers the dead. Perhaps he is really the Jesus figure throughout the movie. Belle Rosen, played by Shelley Winters, is a Jewish grandmother and a former high school swim champ. She's always weighing down the group. However, when they come to a swim trial, she volunteers, and Scott chastens her, says, no, you can't do it. I will do it. However, when Scott attempts it, he gets trapped underwater. It's Belle that dives in to save him. And the undue stress of the extra time underwater and the exertion proves to be too great. And Belle has a heart attack and dies. Mike Rogo, Ernest Borgnine, is a cop from New York, and his wife Linda is an abrasive character that eventually redeems herself, kind of, by being strong for others. And then she falls into the flaming pit and dies. She was a prostitute that Mike repeatedly arrested before he could work up the nerve to propose to her, and the cruise was their honeymoon. Mike loses the one person he saved and loved the most. And then he has to carry on and get the others to safety after the sacrifice of Reverend Scott. In the novel, there are two storylines that were adjusted for the movie or just left out. Robin, the young boy who's traveling with his sister, is actually traveling with his sister and the parents. During a rest break, Robin has to use the bathroom, and his mother goes with him, but then caves to him asking for privacy, and she leaves him. There's a blackout, and Robin is lost. The group tries to find him, but it's of no use. And we know that Robin is dead, but the full extent of his fate is totally unknown. The remaining family members emotionally wrestle with this for the rest of the book. There's also a drunk and his girlfriend. They're eventually abandoned by the group because they find a bar area and decide to sit and drink whatever they find. Scott says, no, you're wrong. You should come with us. Otherwise, you're going to die. And they say, we don't care. During this passage, there's also another group of survivors, and they're heading in the opposite direction of Scott's group. And Scott also says, you're wrong. You're going to die. You're going the wrong way. And they say, no, this is the way we're going. By the end of the story, we learn that the other group of survivors got through relatively unscathed. They actually say they still look like they're going to dinner. And the drunk couple is among them. This inadvertently brings up another concept. Was Reverend Scott really doing the best thing? The movie gives Scott the full hero treatment. With the exception of taking some minor suggestions from Martin, Scott is headstrong and stubborn. He is so focused on saving this group of people that he loses half of his followers and himself in the process. And he does this all in the name of God. Or was he trying to strong-arm the will of God? Was he so convinced of the strength of his faith that he couldn't listen to the others? Was it a Messiah complex? I'm of the opinion that the author possibly didn't like the character of Reverend Scott, since he painted him not as a hero, but as a blowhard. He could not bend for fear he would break. For such a cliched disaster flick, this has so many layers. Some discussion questions that could be brought up would be to ask, there's a certain nobility of spirit and sacrifice. Do you think that God has a preference for the stronger or the weaker version? Should the movie have included the other survivors? And do you feel that Scott redeemed himself? The next movie we're going to talk about is Joe versus the Volcano. Joe versus the Volcano is a modern-day fairy tale and a journey of self-discovery. Filmed in 1990, this movie starred Tom Hanks and Meg Ryan. was produced by Steven Spielberg, and was written and directed by John Patrick Shanley. It features a 90s who's who of cameos, including Abe Vigoda, Ozzie Davis, Nathan Lane, and Dan Hedaya. This movie was not a critical success or even a box office success. However, it does have a large cult following and an immense appreciation for what is called the moon scene. The story is about Joe, an ex-firefighter that is now working at a soul-crushing factory working in sales. His days are bleak, the coffee is bad, the lighting is fluorescent, and the people are interesting. Joe is a hypochondriac, and he goes to a doctor, cameo by Robert Stack, who proceeds to tell him that he is indeed dying. And then, as stories magically unfold, another man, Graynamore, cameo by Lloyd Bridges, shows up and convinces him to do him a favor. Graynamore has a business deal with an island in Fiji. That island has a volcano that will erupt unless someone sacrifices themselves by jumping into it. Since Joe is dying, what better way to go out? Graynamore will give him money, the best hotels and accommodations, and Joe gets to go out in a hero move. Joe takes the deal. In perhaps the greatest shopping montage, eclipsed just a few years later by the one and Pretty Woman, Joe sheds his old life and embarks on both a physical and spiritual journey. Meeting various characters along the way, he asks some life questions, but finds no acceptable answers. He meets Patricia, Meg Ryan, and her third character of the movie, and she is the one piloting the yacht for the trip to the island. During a storm, lightning hits the boat and it sinks. Joe, with the help of 4 Louis Vuitton steamer trunks that he purchased, makes a raft and saves Patricia and himself. And that takes us to the moon scene. Simca Fisher for the National Catholic Registry writes, "To me, all the flaws of the movie are justified by this scene, which is painted in very broad strokes, but is tremendously moving nonetheless. Adrift, losing hope of rescue, and nearly out of water, he is woken by the breaking of the moonlight over the ocean."
Dear God, whose name I do not know, thank you for my life. I forgot how big thank you. Thank you for my life.
Fisher goes on to say that the scene works because it shows how a change of heart really comes about in our lives. Not always in the clear defined moments of choice, but in the middle of the night, when we see with our hearts what the world is really like. He has already agreed to sacrifice his life for a bunch of strangers, an objectively noble thing, but done for the wrong reasons. Because he has nothing left to lose, and he wants to go out with a bang. It sounds like a big deal, but he hasn't really changed much on the inside. He's just become a different kind of desperate. This is how it happens to us so often. We make the big promise, and only later do we grow into it and become worthy of what we have vowed to do. Fisher has a point here, but I would like to interject that heroism was already a part of Joe's life because he was a firefighter, and he was already giving Patricia all the water rations. The themes I see in this scene are regarding the foundational concept of human nature and destiny, McGrath, and the doctrine of revelation. In Christian spirituality, McGrath speaks of Kasad and the term dynamic surrender. The phrase dynamic surrender points to the complexity of the interaction of the divine and the human spirit in spiritual growth. On the one hand, it's necessary to unreservedly surrender to divine providence, allowing God to take the upper hand. On the other hand, that very act of surrender is itself an act of human will. Joe has surrendered to God's will, but he has chosen to surrender himself. He accepts God's will, but is also taking matters into his own hands. Joe has reached a moment in his life that is the end of the proverbial rope. He is in the middle of the ocean, stranded, trying to care for another, on the verge of passing out. And then God is revealed. Romans 1:20 teaches that God's eternal power and divine nature are clearly seen and understood from what has been made, and that there is no excuse for denying these facts. With these scriptures in mind, perhaps a working definition of general revelation would be the revelation of God to all people at all times and in all places that proves God exists and that he is intelligent, powerful, and transcendent. McGrath. Dear God, whose name I do not know. Joe recognizes this. He sees that there is something greater than all that his life has led up to at this moment. It must be noted as well that Joe doesn't ask to be saved or to be cured. He sees God and says, "Thank you." After this, he is still willing to save the island and sacrifice himself into the volcano. He says to Patricia while standing at the volcano's edge, "I saw the moon when we were out on the ocean, shining down on everything. I've been miserable for so long. Years of my life wasted. A long time on a crooked road." He doesn't have an epiphany and then renegotiate on his promise. He knows the deal he made, and he will go through with it. I won't ruin the end for you, but it does finish with a happily ever after. This scene also reminds me of a passage from Heschel, who writes, "There is no faith at first sight. A faith that comes into being like a butterfly is ephemeral. He who is swift to believe is swift to forget." Faith does not come into being out of nothing, inadvertently, unprepared, as an unearned surprise. Faith is preceded by awe, by acts of amazement at things we apprehend but cannot comprehend. We must learn how to see the miracles which are daily with us. We must learn how to live in awe in order to attain the insights of faith. Some discussion questions which would be interesting to talk about could be, what does "whose name I do not know" signify to you? Have you ever experienced a singular moment that has transformed your life? A moment of awe? And why would the writers opt for a non-denominational treatment of God? Our next topic is Buffy the Vampire Slayer, the TV series. Buffy the Vampire Slayer was a movie that tanked, followed by a TV series, 1997 to 2003, that had a huge cult following. The intro is the same in every episode. In every generation, there is a chosen one. She alone will stand against the vampires, the demons, and the forces of darkness. She is the Slayer. That description is a very simple breakdown. Let's go a little farther. Buffy is the Slayer, and when she dies, there will be another Slayer. Through a series of events, she ends up at Sunnydale High School, and here she meets her Watcher, Giles, who is not only a school librarian, but is a person sent by the Watcher's Council who will train her and look out for her well-being. And she has a group of misfit friends, Xander and Willow, who help her as best they can, and eventually are christened the Scooby Gang. Each season tends to have its own overall style and direction, with overlying storylines and freestanding episodes. Demons and vampires generally have a religious theme to them, crosses, holy water, etc. However, the show also delves deep into redemption, love, humanity, faith, and resurrection. Due to the subject matter, death is a prominent event, and there are some brilliantly done episodes on it. The Body, from season 5, episode 16, is a masterful depiction of human grief. Buffy's mom, Joyce, dies of a brain aneurysm, a normal human death, and Joss Whedon handles it in a wonderfully secular way. And over 25 years later, it is still reaping accolades. However, Buffy's deaths are shrouded with more supernatural overtones. Buffy dies twice in the series. Once she is revived by Xander, and once by Willow in a much more problematic way. And this is the storyline we will be discussing. As the finale of season 5, Buffy chooses to sacrifice her life for the good of the world by jumping into a portal to an unknown dimension. The episode ends focusing on her tombstone, so we know that Buffy has died. In the start of the next season, Buffy is still dead. However, her good friend Willow and her girlfriend Tara are trying multiple spells to bring Buffy back. They are convinced she is in a hell dimension and needs to be saved. After one particular spell, they unknowingly succeed, and Buffy is brought back to life while in her coffin. Being the Slayer, she fights her way out of the grave, only to be confronted with a town overrun by monsters and demons, because they know she's not around to stop them. Buffy makes her way back to her friends, and they are relieved to see her. But all is not well with Buffy. She's distant, quiet, melancholy. She regains her strength and proceeds with her Slayer duties. Amazingly, Joss Whedon decides that this is the moment to bring in resurrection. In an interview, Whedon says, as an atheist and an absurdist, when asked at a conference what he has against Christians, he explains that he thinks faith is an extraordinary thing. He goes on to say, I'd like to have some, but I don't, and that's just how it works. It is apparent that he thinks faith is an extraordinary thing. He shows great respect for the concept and provides thoughtful moments to think and ponder about. One of the most progressive aspects of the writing in Buffy is that Whedon treats all of life's big moments as everyday occurrences.
Buffy.
That's Spike, one of the vampires.
Spike, it's daylight and you're...
What? Sun's low enough.
And that's Buffy.
I was going to go inside, but I overheard you and the super friend exchanging a special moment. I came over a bit queasy. Say, aren't you leaving a hole in the middle of some soggy group hug?
Just wanted a little time alone.
Oh, right then.
It's okay. I can be alone with you here.
Thanks ever so.
Right.
Buff. Slam. Are you okay?
Come here. I'm good.
Buffy, if you're in pain, or if you need anything, or if I can do anything for you.
You can't.
Well, I haven't been to a hell dimension just of late, but I did know a thing or two about torment.
I was happy. Wherever I was happy. At peace. I knew that everyone I cared about was all right. I knew it. Time didn't mean anything. Nothing had form, but I was still me, you know. And I was warm. And I was loved. And I was finished. Complete. I don't understand theology or dimensions, any of it really. But I think I was in heaven. And now I'm not. I was torn out of there. Pulled out by my friends. Everything here is hard, bright, and violent. Everything I feel, everything I touch, this is hell. Just getting through the next moment, and the one after that, knowing what I've lost. I can never know. Never.
That is a great scene with a great monologue by Sarah Michelle Gellar, and that was Spike, played by James Marsters. Anyway, as we see, Buffy just confides in Spike, one of the vampires, that she thinks she was in heaven. This is one of the best descriptions, in my opinion, of heaven and her response to being dragged out of it. The fact is eventually shared with all the friends in the musical episode. Again, it's admirable that Whedon took a throwaway episode like a musical and created multiple pivotal moments in it. In Christianity, faiths are a little divided on what happens when a person dies. Even the doctrine of eschatology changes and morphs. Purgatory, heaven, hell, a sleep state until Judgment Day, any number of ideas circulate about the afterlife. However, the thought of being resurrected and brought out of heaven is intriguing. In the story of Lazarus, the most common thought is that he was in a sleep state, and that taking him out of heaven would have been terrible and cruel. What about the use of magic? Willow, a practicing witch, resurrects Buffy using a spell. And before you get upset, don't forget it's a suspension of disbelief. Let's clarify that Giles uses magic sparingly and maturely, whereas Willow is new, powerful, and does not quite have control over herself. And this brings up a question of ethics. Was it morally right for Willow to do this to Buffy? In an interesting move, Whedon emphasizes the dangers of Willow's behaviors and likens the magic to drug addiction. In a purely realistic view, Buffy had to be brought back in order for the series to continue. But this method for doing so created a lot of drama and more plot lines. You can Google this discussion, and it will come up across the globe and throughout the years. People question the ethics of Willow's actions. Again, engaging the suspension of disbelief, they are able to contemplate all the facets of this situation. Some discussion questions. What happens when you die? How long before the soul leaves the mortal coil? And although the method was magic, was Willow right or wrong to resurrect Buffy? Is Joss Whedon's opinion on this clear? Our next movie is The Trouble with Angels. Directed by Ida Lupino in 1966, The Trouble with Angels starred Hayley Mills, June Harding, and Rosalind Russell. Lushly filmed and musically elevated with a score by Jerry Goldsmith, the film is set in a Catholic girls' school. Mary and Rachel are two teens that give the nuns a run for their money with mischievous antics. At one point, having set off the fire alarm due to smoking in the basement, Reverend Mother has an option of expelling the two friends. She sees the situations that both girls would be going home to and has a change of heart. Unsurprisingly, Mary is extremely perceptive and observes many moments of love, faith, and humanity among the sisters. At graduation, much to the dismay of Rachel, it is announced that Mary has chosen to become a novitiate at the convent. Why is this seemingly innocuous film on this list? Because there are so many poignant scenes that are lovingly filmed and portrayed. They range from Christmas Mass with all the nuns singing, to a quiet snowy morning with the Reverend Mother placing crusts of bread on a statue of St. Francis for the birds, and the heartbreaking death of Sister Liguori. The movie is episodic in nature. That is, there are years and seasons. Everything is in neat little boxes. There are a lot of scenes regarding band uniforms and etiquette classes, with a cameo by Gypsy Rose Lee, and scenes where the Reverend Mother and Sister Liguori have tea and debate what to do about the girls. But my favorite scene is this. Rachel, hopelessly inept, has put off her sewing project until the last minute, and her dress is an absolute disaster. The Reverend Mother comes in to see what she's doing and proceeds to take pity and help her. When Mary comes looking for Rachel, she finds the Reverend Mother finishing up a beautifully made dress and Rachel sleeping on the couch. What follows is a moving monologue about the Reverend Mother and how she decided to become a nun.
Oh, she fell asleep, so I thought I'd let her rest for a few minutes. It must be after midnight.
It's nearly 5 o'clock, Reverend Mother.
Oh? Well, so it is. It is nice, isn't it? I used to do a great deal of sewing when I was a girl. I always blessed my mother for insisting that I learn how to handle a needle. When my parents died, I was 16 then. My uncle, who lived in Paris, said, well, Paris was my mother's home before she emigrated to Quebec and married my father. I lost my parents within 3 months of each other. The flu epidemic. Anyway, I went to live in Paris. My uncle arranged for my apprenticeship with a well-known couturier. Of course, I was only a seamstress, but I had visions of creating my own designs. In the house of Madeleine Rouge, challenging the great Chanel. That was my name, Madeleine Rouge. I remember standing behind the curtains with the fitters when the collections were shown. The buyers came from all over the world. And many times as I watched the models display the gowns, I'd think, now I would have done that one differently. Used a different fabric. Something that had more movement, more mystery. I know it's vanity, of course, but I think I could have made a success of it.
How could you give it up?
I found something better.
To culminate your life decision with, I found something better, it's enough to get the idea across that even while having a life full of potential and desire and success, or the thoughts of it, the love and connection of God overwhelmed all the commonalities of the world. Another favorite scene is that of the Reverend Mother comforting an old woman at a Christmas party. This scene shows the compassion and warmth of the Reverend Mother that Mary observes. During the course of this scene, Mary also observes a bunch of other conversations that are quite telling about aging, about being in a home. These all make a difference to Mary.
Children said I could come and have Christmas at their house, but they didn't come. I had gifts for them,
There may have been a very good reason why they couldn't come.
but it's Christmas and they promised.
Oh.
I did everything for them when they were little. Nothing was too hard.
Then do one thing more.
What?
Be happy. That's the greatest gift a mother can give her children. It's the season of our Savior's birthday, and there must be no tears. Go upstairs now. Powder your nose. Make yourself look pretty, and come to the party. There.
I hope I die young and very wealthy.
Obviously, this movie is set into a religious structure. but it's really not about religion. It's written and directed in such a tender way that the thematic material is just infused into every aspect of an otherwise campy and fun 60s movie. It's a gentle foray into the church, the lives of the nuns, and the blossoming womanhood of the girls. Portraying religious calling in this manner, the depictions of the church and of the sisters themselves lead the viewer to a warm and welcoming place that would be worth exploring further. I think a recent movie that would also have this connection might be Sister Act. And some of the nuns in The Trouble with Angels are also in Sister Act. Talk about being typecast. Restating the Pew Research from the top of this presentation, 90% of Americans at this time identified as Christian. I feel like this societal thermostat is what allowed the movie to be relaxed, to be able to convey the story without having to explain any of the imagery. This movie is also based on a book by Life with Mother Superior by Jane Trahey on her life at a Catholic high school. Now, given that the screenplay, the direction, and all the actors, with the exception of 5 male characters in very minor roles, they're all female. This movie has a feminine touch that celebrates friendship, love, support, and coming of age. Rosalind Russell, a well-seasoned actor at this point, was not only a brilliant choice for this role, especially considering the limitations of acting in a full habit, but she was also a devout Catholic whose sense of familiarity with the church rings true in her performance. She's not just saying lines, she's saying lines that she believes. The Bechdel test is a standard that has 3 parameters. 1, that there are at least 2 female characters, that 2 have dialogue together, and that 3 doesn't involve a male character. This is a seemingly low bar to pass, but sadly enough, not many movies pass this test. Movies that don't include Breakfast at Tiffany's, The Avengers, and all 3 Lord of the Rings movies, and even Ratatouille and Shrek fail. The Trouble with Angels is a celebration of the feminist theory of the female gaze, that subjects look and feel different when created by women. A humanizing rather than objectifying view. Discussion questions could include, does this film hold up the thoughts about Catholic schools today? Is the stereotype the same? What role does the female gaze play in the creation of this movie? How would it be different if men had made it? Religion is represented in this movie almost as a character itself, and it's pervasive in all scenes, but not forbidding or scolding. Was the success of this movie and the product a product of the times, or could it still be pertinent, as it is, not refilmed or reimagined today? The last movie we're going to talk about is Dogma. This was written and directed by Kevin Smith. 1999's Dogma is an irreverent stoner take on a modern religious movie. A star-studded cast includes Linda Fiorentino, Alan Rickman, Matt Damon, Ben Affleck, George Carlin, Salma Hayek, and Alanis Morissette as God, and the 2 titular characters, Jay, Jason Mewes, and Silent Bob, Kevin Smith. It's about 2 fallen angels who have figured out a way, plenary indulgence, to get back into heaven. God has cast out Bartleby and Loki and banished them to Wisconsin. They have learned that a church in New Jersey will be rededicated soon, and that all who enter will receive plenary indulgence, forgiveness. Their plan is to become human, enter that church, be forgiven, and gain access back to heaven. Of course, their plan would prove God's fallibility, and thus also bring about the end of the world. Rickman, as Metatron, appears to Bethany, who is the last surviving relative of Jesus, or the last scion, to tell her that she will have the help of Rufus, the black 13th apostle who was left out of the Bible, and 2 prophets, the infamous and foul Jay and Silent Bob. She'll have their help to stop the angels and thus prevent the end of the world. George Carlin, as the cardinal who introduces a rebranded Catholicism to include Buddy Christ, is iconic. Unlike The Trouble with Angels, though, this movie is not gentle or lush. It seems borderline blasphemous and maybe even a touch sacrilegious. However, if you watch it with an open mind, it's not. There's 37 years between The Trouble with Angels and Dogma. At this point, Christianity is starting to lose its place as the majority religion in America. This could account for the heavier exposition of religious themes, or perhaps Smith was just trying to remind people of what they professed to believe. As Michael Swar for FilmObsession.com writes, honestly, the film plays all of its religious aspects completely straight. The comedy comes elsewhere. Let me explain. First of all, Smith treats Catholicism as a fact in the film. Nowhere in Dogma does Smith suggest to the audience that angels aren't real, God isn't real, and the dogma that puts the events of the film in motion isn't real. Smith isn't concerned whether someone in the audience believes it to be true or not. The point is that he believes it's real, and this allows the characters in the film to believe it's real too. The Muse, played by Selma Hayek, points out some of the flaws by followers of Jesus in today's world.
You remember why I left, right?
Because you were tired of doing all the work and getting none of the credit for your ideas.
So I opted to quit being a muse and write for myself. I gave my 2 weeks' notice, got a body, $50, and got sent out into the world to make my fortune.
So what happened?
Writer's block. Can you believe it? Me, a muse, for God's sake. I can inspire anyone I meet and give out 1,009 ideas a second, but I can't keep any for myself. Her quirky sense of humor.
Whose?
God's.
You're saying God's a woman?
Was there ever a doubt in your mind?
He's always referred to as him.
Well, that's not how I wrote. But one of the drawbacks to being intangible is that you have no say in the editorial process. The people that held the pens added their own perspective, and all the pen holders were men. So she became a he. Doesn't stop with God either. The whole book's gender biased. A woman's responsible for original sin. A woman cut Samson's coif of power. A woman asks for the head of John the Baptist. Read that book again sometime. Women are painted as bigger antagonists than the Egyptians and Romans combined. It stinks. Why is the last Zion here?
Bartleby and Loki. They found a way back.
Not the plenary indulgence loophole.
You know about that?
I always knew that thing was a bad idea. Leave it to the Catholics to destroy existence.
You have issues with Catholicism, I take it.
I have issues with anyone who treats God like a burden instead of a blessing, like some Catholics. You people don't celebrate your faith. You mourn it.
So if we're wrong, what's the right religion?
It's not about who's right or wrong. No denominations nailed it yet, because they're all too self-righteous to realize that it doesn't matter what you have faith in, just that you have faith. Your hearts are in the right place, but your brain's gotta wake up.
Look, they made me sound bomb.
A review by none other than Roger Ebert says, I think a Catholic God might plausibly enjoy a movie like Dogma, or at least understand the human impulses that made it as he made them. After all, it takes Catholic theology absolutely literally, and in such detail that non-Catholics may need to be issued catechisms on their way into the theater. Not everyone knows what plenary indulgence is. Sure, it contains a lot of four-letter words, but it has characters who use them as punctuation. But hey, they're vulgarities, not blasphemies. Venial, not mortal. Sure, it has a flawed prophet who never gives up trying to get into the heroine's pants, but even St. Augustine has been there and done that. And from Emily Mazer, Associate TV Editor, it shouldn't be unsurprising that specific parts of the Catholic community were not particularly happy with Dogma. Despite Smith being raised Catholic and still being pretty devout at the time of them making the film, the Catholic League, among other religious groups, found the film to be particularly blasphemous, and though it should be noted that the church itself never made a statement. Perhaps what set off the religious groups was the pretty liberal stance on abortion and euthanasia, or that famous atheist comedian George Carlin was playing a cardinal. Buddy Christ as an image certainly didn't help, nor did making God a woman. But, of course, these are all the things that make the film work. Because even though Smith was a practicing Catholic when making the film, he wasn't conservative. Not to mention the conversations about faith and belief in the film are some of the most interesting and deeply thought-provoking things that Smith has written to date. As a lapsed Catholic, I will say that I found this movie both hilarious and moving. Kudos to Kevin Smith for making religion the plot, for taking faith seriously, but for committing to his view of the world. His vision of this faith might not work for everyone, but it's their loss to miss this outrageous project. For many years, this film has been hard to find online due to legal issues, but it's rumored to be released very soon. How do you think God reacts to spirituality like this? Do the details being amiss take away from the overall concept? And does a movie like Dogma help or hurt the Catholic faith or the Christian faith? I had to have some honorable mentions. We have Amadeus, winner of 8 Academy Awards in 1984, including the Best Picture. This movie focuses on the genius that is Mozart and the arch rival of Salieri. As a music major in 1986, we were all intrigued on whether this was an accurate take on Mozart's life, but unfortunately, I must inform you that it is not. Yes, Mozart and Salieri were rivals in the sense that they were both composers at the time, but there is no other suspicious activity to their relationship. Of course, given the situation of Mozart passing at such a young age, he was only 35, and due to so many causes, one can romanticize the tragedy by feeding into the lore and claiming that he was poisoned. If he was, it most likely was not by Salieri. Ben Pizetsky gives some facts in an article from as recently as April of 2024 from the Handel and Hayden Association, thus proving that the movie myth still lives on today. What is an intriguing facet of this movie is the portrayal of Salieri by F. Murray Abraham. The script promotes that Salieri has all but dedicated his life to music and to God. In real life, he did have a wife and children. But his frustration with the talented Mozart leads him to denounce God and question God's motive in gracing such a crass person and vows to destroy him. A character that oftentimes gets overlooked in the film is the priest, who is listening to his confession in the asylum. And by the end of the movie, he transitions from humoring the old Salieri to being shocked and distraught at what he's heard. Another honorable mention is Jurassic Park. Based on the novel by Michael Crichton, Spielberg's 1993 blockbuster conveys the dangers of playing God and recreating dinosaurs. Believing that science is above all, Hammond does not question that the ability to recreate dinosaurs should occur. He does so with every confidence and conviction, having a vision of the future and living with these beasts. As one character says, God finds a way, and the dinosaurs are able to reproduce. They are also able to escape their fences and go on a rampage, killing characters and taking over the Isla Nublar. In a different pop cultural realm, anytime science explores creationism, many memes will be produced extolling the lesson learned in Jurassic Park. Seven, from 1995, is a crime thriller from David Fincher. Seven is a story about a serial killer who uses the 7 deadly sins as his template for murder. The killings are obviously wrong, but strangely poetic in encompassing the essence of each sin. There is a large part of the movie dedicated to Dante's Inferno, and this movie is suitably dark, depressing, and apt for the subject matter. Morgan Freeman, Brad Pitt, and Gwyneth Paltrow, and Kevin Spacey star in this thriller. One movie I'm going to mention that didn't make the presentation because I only just watched it is the movie Heretic. So lest you believe that movies stick with trying to poke at Catholicism, Heretic is a recent 2024 movie starring Hugh Grant and Sophie Thatcher. It is a suspense horror movie revolving around Mormon missionaries. It's well worth a watch to see a cat and mouse game where the main characters stalk the other's religious beliefs. The movie does dissolve into a basic horror movie at the end, but the first 2/3 are good. It's worth noting that the depth of analysis and the voicing of opinions that all of these stories have garnered over the years. I chose 5, but there are many more. I believe that good storytelling leads to good discussion. It's what makes people think and feel and want to share their thoughts about it. The sacrifices on the doomed Poseidon, the revelation of Joe, the resurrection of Buffy, the gentle strength of the Reverend Mother, and the salvation of the world by the last scion. All of these images light up our imagination and encourage us to deep dive into whatever religious upbringing we might have had. Society dictates the level of religious discourse that movies and TVs can pursue. In today's world of cancel culture, a misstep can easily lead to folly. However, the skill of writers to layer Christian themes seamlessly and sometimes secularly into their work is magical and encouraging. It means that Christian discussions will always be happening, and that's a good thing. It would truly be a shame for viewers to discount films because they lack a religious pedigree. Sometimes, the more honest depictions of spirituality come from the most unlikely places. What have I learned creating this project and being a student in the Christian Spirituality class? Initially, I was unsure what to expect, but as the course proceeded, I found myself fully intrigued and immersed into both revisiting my Catholic upbringing and discovering more about faith. I had the idea for this project percolating since the start of the semester. I kept with this idea not because I didn't find other aspects of the class interesting, but because I felt personally committed. I felt that this idea of exploring Christianity through movies and TV in the secular vein would be authentic to how I process my own views. Focusing on these specific stories and bringing in new elements of what I have learned was also educational. My hope is that this project would be a thought-provoking presentation that would be suitable for the layperson who is either spiritual or not spiritual. As the goal was to open up discussions on Christianity, I felt that it was important to have an understanding of more advanced concepts but to not overwhelm the listener with more cerebral examples and quotes. The material itself organically raises up the questions. And we didn't even explore musicals yet. Thank you for listening. I hope you found this enjoyable.